Discovery class, really good to see you again. Thanks for dropping by. I have a history lesson for you today, and I think you'll enjoy it. Once upon a time, long, long ago in a faraway land, there lived a world leader by the name of Nero. He was the emperor of the Roman Empire, and he did to his city what the ammonium nitrate bomb did to its city. Beirut, Lebanon, August the 2nd, this month. It was hit by a thunderous explosion that destroyed the entire center of the city, killing 200 people and injuring 6,000. Well, the city of Rome, on July the 14th, 64 AD, was hit not with an explosion, but with a catastrophic fire that raged for 3 days and 3 nights. And it was the one event in all of history that writers would point to. Rome was a city of narrow streets, tenement houses made of wood, 2 or 3 stories high. It was a tinderbox waiting to happen. Nero, the emperor of Rome, was home in his palace. He sat in a high tower on a hill safely away, and he watched the city burn. He was the arsonist that set the fire. He couldn't wipe the grin off his face. He seemed so happy and he was so content. He wasn't horrified, as any normal person should be. The specter before him made him say this comment, "I am charmed by the flames." Anyone that tried to put the fire out was put to death. Now I can hear you say, well, why? Hundreds were being burned to death. Bridges over the Tiber River were congested and people were trampled to death, fleeing. What's wrong with this ruler? He should be in the front line saving lives and not sitting in his palace and giggling. Well, there was a reason for his behavior. Nero had a raging heart. He was consumed with jealousy. All the emperors before him had monuments of stone heralding their victories overseas. He had none. Other emperors had statues of their person rising on high pedestal, larger than life, looking over the city. Nero had none. He was envious of the building progress of the Caesars before him. He wanted everything destroyed. With fire destroying everything in its path, Nero could start all over again, build his own monuments, his own temples, build his own stadiums, all dedicated to him. He would be the big shot of history. His name would be on all the principal buildings in Rome. But what a disaster that fire created. The Temple of Luna was burned. The Acra Maxima, the great altar, was gone. The Temple of Jupiter, never seen again. All the household gods vanished. Just picture it. These thousands of people, if they made it, were homeless, and they saw all their gods destroyed by fire because they were atheists. And they were now helpless. Next came another disaster, and it was bitterness, resentment, and deadly life. Just like Hitler in the 1930s, the Germans resented the Jews. Their country was in desperate inflation and depression. Hitler got a clever idea. It's not my fault. We'll blame it on the Jews. And you know what happened next? The Holocaust. Nero, July the 19th, 64 AD, was the Hitler of the first century. He's going to do the same thing. He's going to blame the fire on the Jews. Nero had a plan, and he had it for a long time. He knew who he could blame, and he picked out the likely scapegoat, and you knew who they were. They were the Christians. Why would he pick on them? Well, they were hated because the Roman society knew there was something strange going on with these Christians because they had first been Jews and now they've been converted. And they were connected to this Savior called Jesus. And anti-Semitism was popular then as it is now. And besides Christians practiced the Lord's Supper, they were called cannibals. They were eating and drinking the Lord's body. They called that the love feast, but really was just to the pagan. They thought it was nothing but an orgy. And they also had this evil name. They were called home splitters. These Christians are going to go around and they're going to split your home. How? Because their Savior, Jesus, he had a saying that if you don't leave your father and your mother, and your brother and your sister, for my sake, then you're not worthy of me and you're not worthy to be my disciple. Imagine taking that interpretation and turning them into house hitters. But finally, this was the clincher. The Romans had heard that one day the Christians were going to judge the world with fire. Now they did it, and the rumor spread as quickly as the inferno. Nero had a perfect scapegoat, and he blamed the Christians for the fire in Rome. From AD 65 onward, the persecution of Christians broke out all over the Mediterranean. Nero had Christians rolled in pitch, which we call tar, set on fire to become their human torches to light their garden parties. Some were sewed up in skins of wild animals and they were fed to wild dogs and they were torn from limb to limb. Thousands were crucified, just like Jesus was. Now I come to the lesson today. 1 year after the burning of Rome, Peter, Jesus' disciple, he wrote the letter of 1 Peter and 2 Peter. And in so doing, in writing the letter, he was sending it to Christians who were in hiding. Maybe they had escaped the fire, but they were in other countries and it was just as bad there as it was in Rome. And he says this in 1 Peter 13 through 21. He says, I know what you're going through. His audience was racked with suffering. I know what it's like. Your Savior went through that too. I want you to live for him. So the scene behind 1 Peter is really a very tragic one. It's the tragedy of what happened over there in Rome. But I want you to be steadfast and I want you to be faithful, said Peter. I'm going to give you something that's going to help you live. I'm going to give you some hope. And he told his readers that their present actions and decisions were governed by this future hope. The Christian was to live his life with the expectation of soon seeing his Jesus. If he were to die, he would see his Christ. I have called our lesson today, Outlook Determines Outcome. Our text is 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 13 through 21. Here's my outline. 5 things. 1, prepare your mind. That's verse 13. 2, procure your manners. Verse 14 and 15. 3, produce your motives. There must be something why you're doing this. Verse 16. 4, promote your method. That's verse 17. Finally, praise your master. Verse 18 through 21. All right, let's look at each one of these outlooks and see what the determination is of its outcome. 1, prepare your mind. Verse 13, 1 Peter 1. Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Be self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given to you by Jesus Christ when it's revealed. What is Peter asking these Christians to do? He is saying, roll up your sleeves, put your mind in gear, and get ready. You have a gift coming from Jesus himself. Peter loved to use the word called. And I think I know why, because one day when Jesus was walking along the Sea of Galilee, remember Peter was a fisherman, and he got Peter on the boat and brought him onto shore, and he says, now listen, I have something to tell you. I want you to follow me. You are now a fisherman. I'm going to make you a fisherman of life, but you're going to be a fisherman to men. I'm going to change your career. I'm going to make you win others to become part of my group. That's why Peter loved the word called, and he used it often in his writings. And if you study it, it's really a lovely study. Because if you look at 1 Peter 1:15, he says, we are called to be holy. In chapter 2, verse 9, he says, we are called out of darkness into his marvelous light. Chapter 2 again, verse 21, we are called to suffer and to follow Christ's example of meekness. In chapter 3, verse 9, in the midst of persecution, we are called to inherit a blessing. Chapter 5, verse 10, blessed are all who are called to eternal glory. Seems Peter just loved the word called. And you're no different. You and I have been called. Prepare your mind, for you're a specially earthly exhibit, created to good works. Secondly, Peter said, procure your manners, verse 14 and 15. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all that you do. What's he saying here? He's saying don't be lazy. Don't slip back into those old grooves of evil, just doing what comes naturally. You know better. You're now obedient children. Shape your thoughts into God's life, energetic and blazing. There's a story long before Shakespeare, and Shakespeare was really the modern theater in England, but it was in ancient Rome that theaters really began. They did the same thing. They were mostly attended, however, by high government officials, and even the emperor at times, he would show up. On one occasion, there was a pantomime that was being presented, and it was a mocking play and a harsh put-down of Christians. In Peter's day, most of the popular entertainment was centered around the destruction of Christians. Stage entertainment followed suit. By doing burlesque or pantomime on stage, Christians were ridiculed with ribald laughter and celebration. The theater was packed on this particular night. The audience was excited. They were sitting in their royal box. Who but the emperor himself? His name was Diocletian. The main actor on the stage was a famous star. He was sort of the Tom Hanks of the day. He was the Richard Burton. His name was Gesenius. In the middle of the play, Gesenius did the strangest thing. He shouted to his audience, I have decided to be set free from sins that have become my ruin. The mocking crowd had just witnessed a mocking Christian baptism and an intemperate communion service. Gales of laughter filled the theater as they made fun of the Christian ritual. Gesenius then came to the edge of the platform in the theater, and he paused, and there he looked right into the face of the emperor Diocletian. And he said these words, Illustrious Emperor, and all who are here who laugh at this parody, I'm here to tell you that Jesus Christ is the true King, and I am now one of his followers. I'm sorry for my sins and for becoming a soldier so late in life. Procure your manners. Be an obedient child. 3. Peter is saying, produce your motives. In verse 16, he says, for it is written, be holy because I am holy. We don't use the word holy. It's in our vocabulary, but do you use the word holy? I don't think I use it very much. But you know what it means? It's got a beautiful meaning. It simply means belonging to. When Peter says, produce your motives, he's simply saying, tell others who you belong to. Who are you connected with? Your Savior. Who do you belong to? We have in our congregation at Brentview a couple by the name of Byron and Julie. They came to Brentview when they were just married, many, many years ago. And they've been here ever since. And from those humble beginnings, they started a business out of their home up there in Dalhousie. Byron is an electrician by trade. Julie is an accountant. They started off with one panel truck, and out of the home they did their business all over the city. They raised their 3 kids in that same house. And from that beginning, Byron and Julie has watched a company grow. And it's known all over the city right now. They have, I don't know how many trucks, but they moved from their house into a warehouse, and then they moved from that warehouse to a second warehouse. And I haven't seen their warehouse, but they have over 50 employees now. And they have over 3 or 6 ladies up front in the main office. And they have a wonderful success story because Byron has passed the business now over to his 2 grown sons. And they are doing as good a job as their dad. And they're electricians, just like their dad, master electricians. And I think Byron would be pleased to know that they're probably better than he is. At Christmas time, Byron and Julie, they hold a party for all their staff. What they do, they rent a restaurant for the entire night, just for them. And they have a wonderful time. They give out gifts. They celebrate each other. The staff comes with their spouse. But before the party is over, Byron and Julie tell their company staff who they belong to. They tell them they're followers of Christ. In the middle of the busy springtime and on into summer, they do the same thing all over again, or they go to a park and they have a barbecue. Once again, they honor their staff and they bring in their spouses. And there they are in a wonderful party. But before they go home, Byron and Julie tell them who they belong to. Do you know that that couple is one of the foundations of our church? That solid granite spiritual rock. And on that foundation, we have built Brentview Church. And they would be happy to tell you that they're not the only couple. We have many couples here, just like Byron and Julie. As a matter of fact, if you're listening to me this morning and you're not part of our church, why don't you slip by? When we're open one Sunday, why don't you come and see me? I'll introduce you to Byron and Julie. They would love to meet you. What am I saying? They're really simply saying they'll tell you who they belong to. 4, promote your method. Verse 17, 1 Peter 1. Since you call on a Father who judges each man's work impartially, then live your lives as strangers here in reverent fear. In other words, you call out to God for help, you'll find that He helps. He's a good Father that way. But don't forget, He's also a responsible Father and won't let you get by with sloppy living. The other day, Mary and I went to the Apple store over here at the mall. The battery on our laptop had been wearing out, so we had it replaced. We came back in a week after they called us and said it's ready. But with this pandemic, everything is new and protocol is in place and the store is not the same. And when you come to the entrance of the store, you just can't go in. They take your temperature, they sanitize your hands, they cover your face, and then you wait in line because they take you from this side of the front of the store over to another line before they come in. And there you wait with your mask on, and then they have one of their attendants come out and they usher you inside and they bring you in and you sit, or rather you stand beside one of their desks. We were ushered in and we stood by a table and we waited to be served. A young lady in a mask, she showed up with my computer. And she states that, we've got it all fixed for you, but we're giving you a new device. The device is worth $150. I don't know what it does. Maybe it takes your temperature. I really don't know what it does. But I do know this, that when she handed me the invoice and I took a look at it, she didn't give it to me at all. She charged me for it. And I told her so. Oh, she was so embarrassed. And all I could see was her eyes because she had on her mask. So what did she do? She ran around the store and she asked other helpers if they could help. Now, in that store, there has to be 25, 30, maybe 35 attendants. They all wear the same shirt, the blue shirt. And here she went around and she was trying to find who could help me take this off my little paycheck in order for me to only pay for the battery. She went to 1, she went to 2, she went to 3, and she got no help at all. Finally, there was an old fool, just like me, who came along with his mask, and she took a look, or he took a look at the device where I was paying with my credit card, and he said, "Oh, I can do that." So he just hit it 3 or 4 times and handed it back to her, and there it was. Now, why am I telling you that? Do you know what they call all the attendants at an Apple store? They call them geniuses. Did you know that? Yeah. Now, you remember that I gave blood all my life. One time I was at a clinic, long time ago, and while I was sitting there on my cot, looking up at the ceiling, they had genius jokes on the ceiling. And I don't remember all of them, but I remember a couple of them. And I remember looking up at one and it said, "I thought I was a genius until I thought." Here's another one. "I thought I was a genius. Now I know I are." Listen, if you go over to the Apple store, they're not geniuses. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of them running around and they're really simply, "No, now I know I are's." But if you see an old guy and he has a mask and he has a twinkle in his eye and you need help, go find him, because he's getting very close to what I read there in the ceiling. Peter is saying to his audience, I want you to not be sloppy in your faith. Don't be sloppy in your religion. Don't be sloppy in your behavior. I want you when you go out into the world, I want them to look at you not as geniuses, but I want them to see that you're relevant and you're genuine. There's a big difference between a genuine person and a genius person. You're going to be the genuine. That's what Peter wants you to be. Finally, he says, practice your master. Verse 18 to 21. You know that it was not with perishable things like silver and gold that you were redeemed, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish and without defect. In other words, it cost God deeply to get you out. He paid for you with Christ's sacred blood. Praise your master, Peter's saying. I know what you are going through. I know you're racked with suffering. Many of you are going to be put to death. But remember, outlook determines our outcome. And Peter says, I feel the pain. I'm there with you. I know that. In the 1860s, the United States was in a terrible war. It was called the American Civil War. And it was a war raging between the North and the South. The North was the Union Army, the South were the Confederates. And the year was 1862. And the church was First Baptist Church in Philadelphia. Most of their young men had left that church to be part of the Union Army and put on the blue tunic to fight for the North. But most of those young men did not come home. The pastor of the church had all kinds of funerals. Finally, he got worn down and he needed to take a time off. Well, there was a young pastor by the name of Joseph Henry Gilmore. He came to the church and he filled in that Sunday when the pastor was away. And he preached a wonderful sermon and he preached hope. He gave them the Psalm 23, the Lord's my shepherd. He came to that passage, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. That was his talk. But when he got to the end of his message, he had written a poem. And he concluded his sermon with this beautiful poem. And you know what the poem was? It's actually in our hymn book. I brought our hymn book. Frida, you haven't been playing this for a long time. There's your piano right behind me, waiting for you to address. But when you come back, I want you to teach to our class this beautiful hymn that this preacher Gilmore gave as an audience, to his audience back there in First Baptist in Philadelphia in that time, way back in 1862. Now I'm going to tell you the words and you'll know them. Here's what he concluded his service with. Now remember, these people are in pain. They've lost their young soldiers. What's he going to tell them? He leadeth me, O blessed thought, O words with heavenly comfort fraught. Whate'er I do, where'er I be, it's still God's hand that leadeth me. He leadeth me, by his own hand he leadeth me. His faithful follower I would be, for by his hand he leadeth me. As Gilmore closed that service with that beautiful hymn, so I close our class today with the same words. But before I let you go, I want to give you a little story from the sunny side of the street. I've been trying to close each one of my classes with a little humor to keep it light so that I can see the smile back on your face, because I do miss it. A young teenager, young girl, she loved her latest hits in music, and she would regularly phone the music store to get her latest update. And on this day, in dialing her music store, she phoned the wrong number and she dialed the feed store, part of the grain elevator, and the conversation went like this. Hello? Yes, like, do you like have 2 red lips and 7 kisses? No, we don't. But we do have a tomcat with several kittens. Like, is that a record? We think it is. See you next week. Thanks for joining me.